Warm welcome to today's talk, Thursday the 24th of November. Now, I wasn't sure whether to bring you this information or not because it's a bit complicated, but it transpires through a Freedom of Information request that some of the most senior scientists in the United Kingdom, back in early 2020, when they were writing and supporting scientific papers saying there was absolutely no possibility that the virus could have arisen in a lab, that SARS coronavirus 2 was definitely a natural spillover event. They were quite clear about that, but actually it turns out there was a lot of counter-argument available at the time, and they were aware of that. But of course, we weren't told. We were told absolutely transparently that this was a natural spillover event in definitive scientific papers. Now, I really feel quite let down by this, by the individual scientists themselves, yeah, but people do disappoint us from time to time. That happens, although they should obviously take responsibility for that. But I feel even more let down by the peer-reviewed scientific literature, which we'd always taken as absolute gospel. But it turns out it's maybe less than the case, and we'll find out this involves people like Sir Patrick Vallance and a certain Anthony Fauci in the United States. Now, I don't want to go on without any evidence, so let's look at what we know about this, because we always want to be evidence-based. But I do feel quite let down about it, and I also feel I got a bit of a sickening feeling when I was reading these articles, because I conveyed to you at the time information I was getting from the scientific literature, and it now turns out that this wasn't quite as analytical as we'd like it to be. Now, this is related to viral origins, but the point is, if the literature is open to debate now, in retrospect, about viral origins, what else is going to turn out to be open to further debate? What else did we talk about from the scientific literature that might be less than accurate? Well, we can't really say that at the moment. We can just say what we're talking about here. So pretty let down, and it's I feel, well, basically I'd like to apologise for getting it wrong in the early stages of the pandemic, in the light of future evidence, because in the early stage of the pandemic, I remember reporting these papers saying it was a natural spillover event, whereas now there's significant doubt, and in my view now the balance of probability is pretty overwhelming that it was a lab leak event. Anyway, let's go and look at the data that we have now. Now, this original paper here was from the Lancet. This was back in, when was this? This was February 2020, this original paper. And we talked about it at the time as this prestigious group here who've put the names to all of this, very prestigious group. We are public health scientists, I'll have you to know, who have closely followed the emergence of 2019 novel coronavirus disease. Okay, we are deeply concerned about its impact on global health and well-being. Well, that's motherhood and apple pie, of course. We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 did not have a natural origin. So there you go. We're the mega big scientists, and if you disagree with us, you're a conspiracy theorist. That really is pretty arrogant, to be quite honest. But that's what they were saying at the time, and that is that paper from February 2020 that we're quoting from. So you agree with us or you're a conspiracy theorist. And again, this is about the lab leak. What else is going to come out about this bizarre episode? I've been in a bit of a reflective mood the last few days, really. This bizarre episode that has been the COVID-19 pandemic, the things we've been told that have turned out to be less than accurate. But let's go on, let's stick to the data. We don't want to be emotional. So that was that paper there from the Lancet. Now, this is another one. This is from Nature Medicine. Now, the Lancet and Nature Medicine, this is about as prestigious as you get. I mean, Nature is the most prestigious scientific journal, the Lancet, most prestigious scientific journal. And yet we're now, these are now clearly open to question. But anyway, this is the one from here, the proximal origin of SARS coronavirus 2. That means the recent origin of SARS coronavirus 2, Nature Medicine. And this was published the month after this was published, 17th of March, I think this was published 2020. Nature Medicine, there you go, full credentials. Our analyses clearly show that SARS coronavirus 2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus. So we've got the world's leading scientific journals here, The Lancet and Nature Medicine, saying this is a natural spillover event. It is absolutely not a constructed virus or a human manipulated virus. And if you think otherwise, you're probably a conspiracy theorist. Anyway, let's go on with the evidence. Now, the conclusion that they reached is obtaining related viral sequences from animal sources would be the most definitive way of revealing viral origins. Now, remember, this is back in March 2020. Well, it's never happened. It has simply never happened. Fully formed or evolutionary intermediates. If we take SARS coronavirus 1, for example, 2002, 2003, I think there was 1 or 2 cases in 2004. The animal reservoir is known, the evolutionary intermediates are known, it's all there. But for this, it's not. This virus just landed from nowhere, apparently from nowhere. We now believe, well, I believe, from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And we'll give evidence for that in a minute. So, fully formed or evolutionary intermediates, simply never been found, not there. Now, this is from the Telegraph. Now, if you're in the States, you probably won't know, but the Telegraph is a major news outlet in the United Kingdom, and it's conservative with a big C and a large C. It's not known for going off on rambling conspiracy theories, so it is pretty conservative journalism. UK experts helped shut down COVID leak theory. Weeks after being told it might be true, Sir Patrick Vallance, our senior scientific officer, among scientists behind paper that stifled debate into the origin of the virus. And of course, remember these famous pictures. We've got the chief medical officer here, Sir Chris Whitty. Well, they've been made Sir since. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, of course, and Chris Vallance. Now, I actually, love or hate Boris Johnson here. He admitted he wasn't a scientist. He said he was being guided by the science, but it turns out maybe he wasn't being guided by the science. He was being guided by the science as mediated to him through these scientific and medical officers. There's a difference, a big difference. And I know there's a lot of anger amongst you at this as well. And I'm not going to get involved in that. I feel it as well, but we want to stick to the evidence. So top scientists, including Sir Patrick Vallance, were warned that the virus could have evolved in lab animals. They collaborated in the paper, this above paper in Nature Medicine. Debate was therefore stifled. Now, what is my evidence that the debate was stifled? Well, this proximal origins paper published in the Nature Medicine, it's been accessed 5.7 million times and cited in 2,627 subsequent papers. Now, what this means is this has been used as evidence. This has almost become an axiom. This has been used as evidence in 2,627 further papers. So 2,627 further papers have said this is true because it says so in this Lancet paper. This is the way it works. This is how mistakes are propagated, sometimes through decades. I mean, the classic one, of course, is spinach, isn't it? Popeye eating his spinach to get strength. Because way back in the 1920s, when they first analysed the amount of iron in spinach, they got the decimal point in the wrong place. Now, spinach is a source of iron, but it contains 10 times less than people thought for some period of time because the mistakes are propagated from textbook to paper, from paper to textbook. And it's the way these things go on, and that is still the way science works, unfortunately, to a large degree. So it's been replicated that many times. Now, early emails from 2020. Now, is this the government deciding it's time for accurate scientific and historical debate about the early stages of the pandemic? Far from it. They didn't want to release these papers. They were legally obliged to as a freedom of information request. Why, oh why, are governments not now releasing the data to open it up to scientific and historical peer review? It's almost as if there's something to hide. So anyway, this email, James Tobias, freelance journalist, got these emails released from a Freedom of Information request. Nice piece of freelance journalism there from Mr. Tobias. Well done. Authors held lengthy discussions with experts, Sir Patrick Vallance and Sir Jeremy Farrar, head of the Wellcome Institute, big institute in the UK. Big buildings on Euston Road in the centre of London. They were warned that Wuhan Institute of Virology had been carrying out research on bat coronaviruses at worryingly low levels of biosecurity. Researchers to alter SARS-like bat coronaviruses have been taking place for many years in Wuhan. So they'd been manipulating bat coronaviruses, which this does derive from, SARS coronavirus 2 does derive from that, for years at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The outbreak happened to occur just a few miles from there, but it was nothing to do with that. It was a natural spillover event. I mean, it really is straining credulity, isn't it? And yet that's what was published in the scientific press. And these doubts and the information that this work had been going on at Wuhan Institute of Virology, they'd been manipulating these very viruses, was not mentioned in the paper. I think it's fair to say the best we can say about this paper is it was not open and transparent, not by any means. Very disappointing. So Jeremy Farrar, Wellcome Institute, in one of the emails, he said Wuhan was like the Wild West. Now, I can't say I like the sound of that. This is a senior British scientist saying that Wuhan Institute of Virology was like the Wild West. Doesn't sound good to me, does it? But this wasn't mentioned in the paper. This is the point. This was just ignored in the paper. Professor Christian Andersen, he's the lead author actually, had earlier told his colleagues, apparently, according to the Daily Telegraph, that features of the virus looked as if they'd been engineered in a lab, but not mentioned in the paper. These doubts were not mentioned in the paper. So Jeremy Farrar, again, the Wellcome Institute, it's important that we understand how all pathogens emerge so we can prevent future pandemics. This is why this is so important. We need to prevent future pandemics. As efforts to gather evidence continue, it's important to stay open-minded. I agree, but I would have liked to have known that when I was talking to you in February and March 2020. I would like to have known that then, but it was given as absolutes in peer-reviewed scientific papers. This is, well, you can see I'm still struggling with it. It's, and I passed it on. I passed this on to you as the scientific word. Looking back, do I wish I'd questioned all these leading experts more? Do I wish I had questioned the leading scientific journals more? At the time, it would have been unthinkable. Now, I actually feel naive for not questioning them more, for taking too much on trust. And what other things is this going to apply to is quite it's actually quite it's quite alarming potentially, actually. Anyway, let's go on with the data that we have. Now, serial passaging. This is where so what you can do in the lab is you can put the virus from one animal to another animal to another animal to another animal to another animal. You can do that 1,000 times potentially. And what that does is it really mimics a natural looking evolutionary pattern. So it's kind of an accelerated evolution. It's like dogs. Dogs weren't created in a laboratory. Of course not. They come from wolves. But they've been selectively bred for, 20,000 years now, or however long humans have had relationships with dogs. Other animals are the same. Other plants are the same. We've selectively bred them. They're still natural, but they've been manipulated by humans to direct their evolution in a purposeful way. And that can be done with this serial passaging. It's much the same thing. Would cause the virus to contain... Now, this is where this paper gets complicated. Would cause the virus to contain O glycans. But you see, the point is, they say because... Don't worry what these are. These are just sort of protein-based carbohydrates in the virus. But what they're saying is because it contains these, it couldn't have had a lab-based origin. But these could have evolved in a lab situation through this sort of accelerated evolution, exactly the same as they could in the natural situation. So it's no argument at all. And the scientists writing this paper at the time, I would have thought, would have known that. I'm surprised they didn't seem to know this. Or if they did, they forgot to write it down in the paper. The second notable feature of SARS coronavirus 2 is a poly-based cleavage site at the junction of S1 and S2. So what this is sometimes called the furin cleavage site. So what again, it's a bit, I don't think they're hiding behind science here, but they're saying because there's this molecule that divides the spike protein. So the spike protein, when it's together like that, essentially won't get into your cells, but it has to be separated a bit, and then it fits into your cells. And there's this cleavage site that does that. And again, they're saying because this cleavage site is there, and furin is just like a pair of scissors that would cut that site. It's an enzyme, it's a peptidase that would cut that. They're saying that because this was there, that means it couldn't have been manipulated in a laboratory. But as we've said, it could have been. It's a bit like saying because chihuahuas exist, there can be no human intervention. It really is quite bizarre that there would, or any other of these funny little dogs or big dogs or whatever dogs, because they exist, there can't be human intervention. But they're there precisely because there's been human intervention. So it's really very strange that they would say these things. Dutch virologists, this is from another email chain. It's good that this possibility was discussed in detail with a team of experts. Well, not particularly good came out of it. However, further debate about such accusations, I'm not talking about accusations here, Professor, we're trying to get to the truth, would unnecessarily disrupt top researchers from their active duties. I'm not sure about that. And to do unnecessary harm to science in general and science in China in particular. Well, my response to that was, I don't care about science in general and science in China, because if science isn't about truth, it's about diddly squat. Science is about trying to find out what is the nature of reality. And if we're ignoring aspects of that, then what is science? It becomes a mockery, it becomes a farce. Worse, it becomes a tool to be used in potentially unscrupulous hands, and history is replete with the abuse of science. I'm not going to go into details now, but I'm sure you can think of times that pseudoscience has been masqueraded as science to gain the ends of particular individuals, often with cataclysmic, disastrous effects. February the 8th, email Professor Edward Holmes, one of the authors. Ever since that outbreak started, there have been suggestions that the virus escaped from a Wuhan lab, if only because of the coincidence of where the outbreak started, of course. He said this: I do a lot of work in China, and I can tell you a lot of people there believe this, and they believe they are being lied to. So a lot of people in China, according to Professor Edward Holmes, one of the authors, a lot of people in China, he's saying, from his knowledge of China, believe that it comes from a lab. They believe that their government's lying to him, but it wasn't mentioned in the paper. It was mentioned in the emails, for which this freedom of information request has illuminated. Ever since this outbreak started, there have been suggestions. Yeah, we've done that bit. So he works in China and is suspicious. Professor Christian Anderson, again, the lead author, 8th of February 2020, wrote in an email, passage of SARS live coronaviruses have been going on for several years, and more specifically in Wuhan under BLS, Biological Secure Laboratory 2 conditions. Now, these BSL2 laboratories are used to study moderate risk infection agents or toxins such as salmonella. Not my words, this is directly from the lead author. Serious disease should be handled in a grade 3 or 4 lab. So serious doubts about the biosecurity of the Wuhan laboratory, considering the viruses it was handling. Basically, he's feeling it's completely inadequate. But again, not mentioned in the paper. Why weren't we allowed to know this at the time in 2020? Wuhan Institute of Virology have been importing back coronaviruses from areas of China which hold the closest relatives. So we looked at this before. The closest relatives to the SARS coronavirus 2 are in other parts of China and northern Laos. We now know that they're not the same, and there's no intermediates, and there's no evolutionary intermediates that have been discovered. Almost as if all the intermediates had been deliberately destroyed in a localized area. But they've been brought in from there, and they are the closest relatives to the virus that we have. So they'd been doing that for a long time, and yet this wasn't mentioned in these papers. They'd also applied for funding to manipulate virus by insertion of a furin cleavage site, FCC. Now, this furin cleavage site, as we said, it's the bit between the S1 and the S2 unit, and it allows the S1 and the S2 unit to come apart. And when they're apart, they're able to infect the cell. So it appears they're able to infect our cells. So it appears the Wuhan Institute of Virology had applied for permission to deliberately increase the infectiousness of this virus to humans by moving these S1 and S2, spike 1 and spike 2 units, the part that actually goes into our cells, of course, into the ACE2 receptor site. It appears that applied for permission to do that. Now, whether that happened or not, we haven't been told. Some might think it looks rather like it did happen, but we're not told that. That would be a supposition. The email chain involved a certain Anthony Fauci, director of the Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, an organisation which was funding research at the Wuhan lab. This all sounded like conspiracy theory at the time, but now this is published in reputable papers, newspapers, reputable press, and I don't think it's in the BBC, but it's in reputable press. And we're cross-checking it with the scientific papers at the time, and as far as we can see, finding it to be accurate. Now, you probably remember we looked at this Senate report on viral origins. Interim report from the Senate grouping. I found this pretty convincing. The emergence of SARS coronavirus 2 that resulted in the COVID pandemic was most likely the result of a research-related incident, and they gave lots of evidence. There was increased searches for flu-like symptoms. There was differences from natural spillover events. So, for example, SARS coronavirus 1, 2002, 2003, Middle East respiratory syndrome, but both coronaviruses. The animal intermediates have been found, the evolutionary intermediates have been found. And also what happened with this and influenza viruses. So for example, if these viruses are going to jump from animals to humans, then that means the virus has already spread amongst a lot of different animals. They're in a population of animals. So that means that an animal here can cause a spillover event, and an animal 50 miles away can cause a spillover event, and an animal 100 miles away can cause a spillover event. And that's what we see with most of these influenza and other SARS coronavirus 2 infections. We see several spillover events. So you get the new disease popping up here and popping up there and popping up here and popping up in different places. Didn't see that with SARS coronavirus 2 at all. It just popped up in Wuhan. If it had been widespread in animals, firstly, it would have been found in animals, and secondly, there would have been multiple spillover events, and there wasn't. This is different from other infections, as this Senate committee pointed out. Lack of intermediates from bats to humans, they point out, of course. So influenza, just one example they pointed out, H7N9, multiple independent introductions across multiple locations, not one in one place. Geographical disparate, independent spillover events. So it popped up in here and it popped up there and it popped up everywhere, not just in one place. SARS coronavirus 2, 2002, 2003, was a few cases in 2004. At least 5 independent spillover events, not just one, at least 5 that they know of, Live animal markets followed by human-to-human transmission. Additional independent subsequent spillover events, infections occurred in humans after. So what actually happened, even after the SARS coronavirus one had gone away, there was a few other spillover events as late as 2004. Well, with SARS coronavirus 2, we've seen no further spillover events. There was just the one. If it was a spillover event, there was just the one. Completely different origin from previous viruses. The evolutionary history of animals in humans was present in these other SARS coronaviruses, not in the SARS coronavirus 2. Geotemporal spread of COVID-19 in China. Earliest identified SARS coronavirus 2 was already well adapted. There was no evolutionary intermediates. You know, in evolution, you always have to have intermediates. You don't suddenly jump from one species to another. There are intermediates. And yet with SARS coronavirus 2, no previous evolutionary intermediates have been found. from the existing SARS coronaviruses that are found in bats that are the most similar. In nature, they just simply don't seem to exist. Why weren't we made aware of these doubts in 2020? Earlier SARS coronavirus 2 had little genetic diversity, where you'd expect a lot of genetic diversity if it had been the result of an evolutionary process. So a bit complicated today. There we go. Freedom of information requests, not government giving us information. Now, lack of debate at the time. We're only told one part of the story. I reported that to you unambiguously. I apologise for that, but more ominously. Well, no, this is pretty ominous, because if we don't know this, we don't know. We have to find out the truth about this, because otherwise we're not equipped for the next pandemic. If we don't know what happened in this time, how the heck can we get it right for next time? Having, some might say, performed suboptimally as a political set of entities, even as a human set of entities, we haven't performed very well with this pandemic. So we need to get it right for next time. But also, if we were let's just say if certain people were economical with the truth about this, have they been economical with the truth about other important aspects of the pandemic? So disappointing. My apologies if I misled people in 2020, but we always go by the evidence that we get. And personally, I wish I hadn't been as trusting of the scientific authorities and the scientific publications in 2020. Well, but you live and learn, I suppose. It's a pity that it makes you become more cynical and more doubtful of authority as a result of this. You know, we need to work out a way to restore the trust. We really do. Anyway, well, as long as I can carry on thinking about these things, I'd like to carry on reporting the evidence as I understand it and as I analyse it. And of course, all the links are always given in all of these videos, so you can cross-check them for themselves. Don't take my word for it. Thank you for watching.